Hi, this is Charlie giving you Wednesday's video. This video is on trend lines. How do I use trend lines and what are the ways to use them? So traditionally, let's draw a, oops, that wouldn't be a very straight trend line, was it? Would it? But anyway, traditionally, you've got price going up, it pulls back, and then once it's done two pullbacks, that's when you know whether you've got a trend line or not. You haven't got a trend line until you've got a base point, whether that is here, or whether it was down here. But let's say your base point's here, and then once you've got the second point, then you can draw a trend line underneath. And sometimes we're quite fortunate in that you can then see, oh, there's a channel in play as well, so which is quite useful information, because when we've got a channel in play, then as price comes up to the upper trend line, then we can be very wary that do we want to keep on buying up in that zone, because the market may want to consolidate or pull back from that area. You wouldn't necessarily want to be buying up at that area anyway, and certainly you may have already been long and be looking to bank profits when price comes up to that zone. So there's a lot of different ways that we can use trend lines. Let's go through them. I've got a trend channel here in play. Now a trend channel is just two trend lines. This was on an hourly chart of the euro dollar just last week, and so you can see these are the lines that I had on my chart from last week. So so we could see that I'd very quickly got the lines in play, and in fact I think I'd put the upper trend line on before I put the lower one on, because we'd seen that we'd got there we got our first touch there. So once price has fallen away there, we can put a trend line on. So when price came up here for the second test, so to speak, of this line, then that's an opportunity to be a seller. So how would you use that information at that point? Well, you can just sell if you wanted to. Some traders will just sell directly or buy directly into trend lines. Or you can go down to a smaller time frame. So this is an hourly chart, so go down to a smaller time frame, like maybe a 15-minute chart or something like that, or maybe even a 5-minute chart, to see if there's any sell signals coming in around that point when it's coming into the trend line. What could sell signals be? They could be, some people use candlestick analysis, they might be using candlestick reversal signals, they might be using divergent type indicators as well that can give them an indication that maybe the price is diverging, maybe it's not. But anyway, they can use, there's a number of different formats you can use. You can even use volume as well, and volume spikes into these sorts of zones. So there's a few different things you can do there. And likewise, even within a downwards trending channel like this, when price comes down to the lower trend channel line, quite often it can mean that there's a bounce coming. And now, funny enough, I was looking at this just on Friday, and if we had have got down to this lower trend channel line, I would have looked for reasons, if there were any, to be a buyer, because I know that it's into a support zone at that point, and we could have a bounce. Didn't quite get there, so there was no trade. But it's that type of thing that you look for. So let me give you, let's just take this out to a higher time frame. So let's now give you some more examples here. All these trend lines have been on my charts for ages. This is still the euro dollar here. So this is now a daily chart, and during this phase here, this was during June, there was a lower trend line across here, and that meant that we could also then copy that trend line up here and pop that on. In fact, this upper trend line was already on before price got back up to it on this second attempt, because we've already got the lower trend channel line. So once that line was in, we can then copy this across and say, oh, maybe if it comes up to this zone, that could be form another area of resistance, which obviously it did become. And again, within a trend channel, then you can look to buy and sell or take profits at these levels. Now, as you can see, when price came back down to here, it just went straight through. So obviously nothing's 100%, went straight through on that occasion, straight through the trend line. But it's a sort of area that I would look at and say, okay, is this a buy zone? Again, are there any reasons? If I'm looking at a daily chart here, maybe I'd go down to an hourly chart or even a 4-hour chart to see if there's any buy signals at that point that it's coming down to that trend line. Again, sometimes there's not. There's not always going to be buy signals, whether it be, like I've already said, candlestick reversals or reversal type of candle formation, bar formations, volume indications, or even things like divergences as well. Maybe there's not. But anyway, so we broke down. But what happened? You leave your trend line on, because what happened? It came back up to the trend line and ended up then using that as a kiss goodbye move to then sell off. So don't always get rid of your trend lines as soon as price is broken, because sometimes they'll still come back up to do a retest. So anyway, so that's those two trend lines. Let's now go. So I've covered this downwards channel here, which was on the hourly chart, and I've now just covered that one. Now let's go out to the higher time frames, because these lines are all on my chart. Actually, the weekly's no good there. It make it a bit easier going out to the monthly. So now if we go to the monthly chart here, we can see that there's been some much longer term trend lines in play. And in fact, this was a really interesting point here. We'd come up to form the trend line at this point. So here was an interesting zone back in 2014, and here in 2018. So we came up here into early part of last year, and I was shorting into this zone with our swing traders, and our swing traders remember that. And it's funny actually, because although prices come up to the trend line, the long-term trend line at this point, and you can see along here this red horizontal line, resistance line, we'd also come into this resistance zone as well. We'd overshot it, but you have to allow some poetic license in price. You can't, price doesn't exactly always hit these lines and then immediately, as soon as it touches, reverse. So you have to allow some space for that. But we had sell signals coming in on the daily and weekly charts. This is the monthly, so I had sell signals coming on the daily weeklies at that time, so we shorted it. And the funny thing is, even when you do a trade like that, it doesn't always mean it's going to be comfortable. It logically, you can say, yeah, okay, it's into that trend line, and we can look at it now and say, yes, that was a logical trade. But when you take it into real time, you've got, and I'm taking this trade with our swing traders, there's always going to be swing traders saying, oh, but Charlie, the trend is up. And you're like, well, yeah, it probably is on the daily charts. Well, it is on the daily charts at that point. It's been having a good run. But we're into trend line and resistance, and so therefore you go to the smaller time frames, as I've just talked about, to see if there's any sell signals coming in. And so it doesn't matter if you're looking at a daily chart and you go down to an hourly or 4-hourly chart to look for sell signs, or if it's higher time frames like this one that we're seeing here. So, and we can see right where we're at right now in 2019, we're right on this lower trend line, which dates all the way back to 2000. So we're right on that now. So it's a support zone. Until proven otherwise, it's still a support zone. Now, we've already had a number of tests of it, so maybe this time it's going to break. We'll have to see. But anyway, we are into a trend line support. So anyway, this is all just part of using trend lines, and they are very, very useful in your trading. You don't get to use them all of the time. I don't get to use them all of the time, because sometimes, plenty of the time, markets aren't giving you a trend line. You know, the markets, the movements are too scrappy, and there's not a trend line to put on your charts. But as you can see, if I click through just a few of my markets here, just the pound, you can see I've had a trend channel on the pound over the last month or so. Let's have a look at the yen. I don't know if I've got any on there. Let's have a look. I've got one here from way back. That's on a weekly chart. Yeah, if we go all the way back, then you can see I've still got this trend line, which formed back in 2015, or that's where the top was, and it came across these tops. But I've left that trend line on because it's still an important level. Like the same reason I've left this trend line on all the way back from there, because at any time, even though it broke, look, it just came back, hugged that. If I stretch that trend line out, you can see that price just hugged that trend line before then falling away. And likewise at the moment, price is just hugging this trend line. Does it break it, or is it going to come back off? So they're well worthwhile keeping these trend lines on. So with a lot of these markets, again, look at the Aussie dollar. I leave these trend lines on because at some point in the future, if for whatever reason the Aussie came all the way back up, then that trend line would become an important zone from which as price is coming back to it from underneath. So Really important trend lines. I tend to take tops to cut through tops, but sometimes what can happen is it's not a perfect thing. So let me bring up the pen again. So sometimes what can happen is you've got your first point, price then pulls back. You've got your second point maybe there, and maybe there's a third point here. And if I draw the trend line exactly under that low, maybe price doesn't, and then price, let's say, goes again, you can actually say, well, that was maybe a spike close. That could have been like the actual low on that bar could have been like a lower wick. So sometimes you're drawing a trend line through. Okay, now let's just draw that low in there. Let's say it's like that. So sometimes you draw a trend line through a candle or a bar so that it can actually touch the next one over there as well. So sometimes that means they can need adjusting. But generally speaking, we want to get those touches lined up. So have a look at trend lines, and giving you some hints here today about using trend lines and trend channels and how you can use them to trade off, looking at reversals on smaller time frames, or whatever it is you use within your analysis, whether it's reversals, divergences, or volume analysis, with regards to spikes, or whatever it might be that you use. So very much worthwhile putting lines on your charts. At some point you have to clear them down a bit, but they're well worth having on your charts because these things are very much tradable. Hopefully that gives you some food for thought for this week. I'll be back in touch on Friday, hopefully. Take care for now. Give us a thumbs up if you can. Cheers.